Well, good morning again. Thank you all for joining us. We are very happy to have Sister Terri Bednarz, a member of our Institute leadership team, as our speaker today. I know Sister Terri is going to kind of introduce herself and tell us a little bit about her, but I just wanted to say that we're very grateful for you to be here today. We're happy to learn more about, as leaders, how we can deepen our Catholic identity and strengthen our relationship with the church. So before you begin, Sister Terri, I'm just going to, because I see a few more people coming in, if you need to select your language from the globe at the bottom. And then, Sister Terri, I welcome you to begin. Thank you so much again for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be here with all of you, and many of you I recognize from the recent meeting. So anyway, it's good to be here. And what I'd like to do with the presentation here is do it in sections and be able to have time for us to do some sharing on insights or comments or questions. Okay, so it won't be a straight through presentation. I'm going to go ahead and share and get a PowerPoint up for those of you who need visuals. And then I'll talk a little bit about myself so you know where I'm coming from. All right. Okay. Does everyone see this pretty good? And those of you who are really good with your tech, you can know you can move my picture if it's blocking something up in the upper right corner. You can usually drag and drop that image up there if it gets it out of the way for you. So much of my presentation today is going to come from my 40 years of experience as a Sister of Mercy and as an educator. I taught primarily service learning and social justice courses at Mount St. Mary High School in Oklahoma City and at the Mount St. Mary's Academy in Little Rock, Arkansas. But in addition to teaching, and while I was teaching much of the time, I also engaged in other ministries. I served women and children who were unhoused, volunteered at a healthcare clinic for undocumented migrants and asylum seekers. I visited women in prison and helped develop transitional housing for women coming out of prison. And during the summers when I was not teaching, I worked on the border, the Texas-Mexico border, primarily with the Arise community. And it was through these experiences, and the reason why I'm sharing them with you, that I saw a need for helping my students understand the root causes of injustices. I wanted to connect students to the people these ministries served. I wanted my students to experience the works of mercy firsthand, to embody and animate the Gospels and the gospel values. So what I ended up doing was developing service learning programs and courses that gave students experience with meaningful direct service and taught them how to advocate for systemic change. I eventually did go on to become a professor of biblical studies at Loyola University in New Orleans. So you're going to see in this presentation that my ministry experiences and my life in mercy will shape this presentation. So before we begin, before we get at the heart of it, I do want to acknowledge that my experience as an educator has been shaped by my own U.S. cultural lens. But I do hope some of what I offer here may be helpful in some way to our educators in Guam, Jamaica, the Philippines, and Central and South America. And I'm also going to try to be mindful to speak slowly for Katie. Katie's going to get a workout. All right. So let's start with this question. And what does it mean to be prophetic? The prophets of old not only condemned injustice, they also urged a course of change, or a change of course, rather. Prophets spoke of protecting the most vulnerable in their communities and in their time, The most vulnerable were widowed women, orphan children, strangers in the land, and those who were destitute and poor. These were groups of people living without their kinship groups to protect them, not just from hunger, but to protect them from violence, hatred, and other social ills. Prophets advocated for change. They urged powerful leaders in their communities not to engage in oppression and violence against the most vulnerable among them. In today's language, prophets spoke truth to power. They did not remain silent in the face of injustice. Prophets challenged powerful leaders in their communities, and they challenged their communities to be generous and welcoming, compassionate, and loving. Yep, I'm going slow enough for you, Katie. Okay, all right. So we all know what happened to the prophets of old. So I am not advocating for you as leaders of Mercy Catholic Schools to put yourself or your school on the line for social justice issues. So what does it mean to be prophetic leaders in our Mercy Catholic Schools? It means that you ground yourself in the gospel values, in the spirit of mercy, in the teachings of the church, and by doing those, you will be able to carry the prophetic voice forward. So what is at the heart of prophetic leadership? Building a loving and generous and welcoming, compassionate community that ensures inclusion and embodies a generous spirit and loving kindness. Working against violence, intolerance, and hatred that threatens the vulnerable among you. Now, what are some strategies that I could offer for prophetic leadership? That would include building a strong, vibrant school community and a curriculum that will help students, teachers, and staff more deeply embody and animate the gospel values. Now, I'm sure some of you have heard of her, Brene Brown. In her book, Braving the Wilderness, she writes, "It is hard to hate someone up close, so move in. Learning, which involves working with others and serving others, closes the distance between what the student and the faculty member and the staff learn and how the student, faculty member, and staff are changed by what they learn." So what are some other strategies for prophetic leadership? Curriculum that includes engaged learning, experiential learning, and immersive learning. I suspect you're familiar with all of these. These kinds of learning and processing can be effective ways to help students and to help teachers and staff animate the gospel values, increase empathy, and understanding for the critical concerns. Understanding that strengthens empathy is more likely to happen when injustice has a human face. When we listen to and accompany those who suffer injustice, we tend to be more receptive to change within ourselves. So the focus is not just outside of ourselves. It's not just on charity. We ourselves must continually undergo the conversion of lifestyle. So embodying and animating gospel values means that just learning root causes is not enough. It's important, but not enough. Our students and faculty and staff need to learn and to experience advocating for systemic change. So let me just share a little an experience of teaching that I had at the Mount in Little Rock. So when I taught there, this was back in the 90s, I taught a course in social justice. And I had students bring their own envelope and stamps to write letters to their congressperson and to the President of the United States, speaking on any justice issue that we covered in class. It would be their choice. And they spoke with their own voice. They did not in any way, and this is important, represent the school. This was their position. And I also had them learn how to identify who their legislators were. I had them call their legislators. And the question of why did I do this, especially when there was some resistance in the beginning, because I had served on an institute-wide social justice committee and found that people were afraid to contact their legislators. They did not understand how their voice could affect systemic change. This is adults, many adults. And I could ask each of you now, have you ever called your legislators? Now, I am speaking from the US perspective. This would work differently in other countries. So I wanted to take the fear out of the process for our students. If they could have just do this once and see what it was like, it might be helpful to them. I wanted them to grow into adults who could develop skills and learn how to use their voice for the issues that they believed in. Now, we all understand that prophetic leadership in our schools requires prudence and careful tending, following the teachings of the church, and risk management, especially as it relates to Mercy Catholic schools. It's important to anticipate and navigate how the prophetic voice is used when embodying and animating gospel values. While a gospel value such as feeding the unhoused won't likely be controversial, advocating for inclusive communities might well open the door to controversy. Should we do it? We shouldn't shy away from it. We need to process how to do it. The nature of prophetic leadership in today's age, especially in today's political climate, requires proactive building of relationships, processing to think through possible risk, and it's very important to build relationships with local bishops, to be in conversation with the director of MSEA, Sister Lisa, or in this case, an interim Nell, to have conversations with the directors before controversial issues arise. They can assist you in anticipating and navigating issues. And they can help you with establishing and building relationships with your bishop. Often, controversial situations can be navigated to the benefit of the school if the bishop is approached in a helpful way. So let's take a pause for about the next 2 or 3 minutes if we need it. And let me just see, I guess I can stop sharing so I can take a look at you. let me do that. Well, I can't seem to get it to work. There we go. All right. So let's just take a few minutes and see if there are any thoughts, reflections, concerns, that you would like to share before we continue. And you might have to raise your hand so we can see you. I don't know how many people are on here.
You could either unmute yourself or use one of the hand raising button at the bottom. Either is okay because we have about 24 people on here. So I'm on a couple screens.
And if you're not ready at this point, that's fine. I just want to give you the opportunity to, before we go deeper into this discussion. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on. That'll be fine. All right, here we go. Share. All right. So let's go a little deeper in considering some strategies for strengthening our Mercy Catholic identity. And you'll notice I say Mercy Catholic. Those two are very integrated. We don't separate being Mercy and being Catholic. I know a lot of times there is a certain pride in saying we're Mercy, but we are grounded in the church, and I'll speak a little bit more to that later. So let me present these strategies under two main topics: the shifts that are impacting Catholic education and strengthening our Mercy Catholic identity. I'll share with you on how these strategies carry tremendous importance for shaping Mercy education today, now, and into the future. And of course, you'll have opportunities to share your experiences and insights after I go through these strategies. So let's start with the shifts impacting Catholic education. Of course, I can't speak to everything impacting Catholic education, but I'll give here a little historical context, looking briefly at shifts in Catholic education in the industrial age, and then moving to discuss shifts occurring in the technology age. I'll tap in a little bit into the coming age of AI. It's important to note that these shifts impacting student learning, how they are impacting student learning, and discuss how Mercy might want to respond to these shifts. So just setting a little historical context. I remember when I taught 7th grade at St. Alphonsus in New Orleans, and the classroom was on the 3rd floor at that time of an unair-conditioned room. So imagine New Orleans in the summer, like September, it'd be pretty much up in the 90s with no air circulation. I had 25 students in what I thought was an extremely hot and crowded classroom, until one of our retired sisters, who still wore the habit, by the way, shared with me that she once taught in the same classroom and she had 65 students. She wore a full-length habit at that time. Now, I was flabbergasted, to say the least, and became immediately and eternally grateful for the 25 students that I had in my now perceived spacious, cool classroom. In the late 20th century of the industrial age, especially in the 1950s and 1960s, many religious communities were educating the masses. It was not unusual for sisters to teach 50, 60, or even 100 students in one classroom. And I just want to point out something here, because last night I gotta slow up. Last night I was going to a technology conference online. And one of the presenters was talking about how the students in this picture you see here, in their time, they usually went on into the job marketplace and had at most two jobs before they retired. Most of them only had one. They had one job for most of their life, and then they retired. When I entered the job market, this was back in the 80s, mid-80s, I was told that I would possibly have up to 7 to 10 different jobs before I retired. Now, given that they didn't know I was going to be a sister, that's another whole reality. Then, students today have generally been told they will have 10 to 12 different jobs before they retire. Well, last night at this conference, the speaker said the students of today who enter the job market will have 20 to 30 jobs before they retire. It really surprised me. I was quite shocked by that. But it's the effect of AI. It's what's going to happen when AI starts really they say in the next 4 to 5 years, there's going to be quite a bit of change. So anyway, let me get back to this. In the technology age, in the late 20th and 21st centuries, classrooms underwent and are still undergoing significant changes. By the 1980s and 1990s, the size of the classroom had reduced to 25 students. The brick and mortar schools saw classes engage in more active types of learning. And interestingly, this type of learning became more intimately engaged type of learning, the kind of education that actually Catherine McCauley set up for the students at Baggett Street. Engaged learning approaches continues to be tremendously effective for students with different learning styles and for students who culturally learn differently. So students who had different learning abilities or learned culturally differently during the industrial age classrooms really struggled. Today, they're finding more opportunities to assist them. Education began to extend beyond the brick and mortar classrooms through the digital remote learning movement that was happening. And we found that students no longer need to rely exclusively on their own classroom teacher for instructions. Students were in fact using social media to learn on their own. When I taught biblical studies at Loyola University in New Orleans, I would hear students say from the Catholic schools say they use social media to learn about subjects that their religious studies high school teacher wouldn't touch. I thought that was kind of humorous because I did teach religious studies at the high school, but that they go to social media to get the answers if their teacher won't give it to them. Well, that's interesting. We also realized that most students at Loyola, when I was teaching here at the university level, the students were not reading the chapters that I assigned in their textbooks to prepare them for the upcoming lessons. Professors were going nuts with students not reading their textbooks. Then I discovered that my students were actually going to YouTube. They were going to YouTube to learn the chapter of the book from one of their peers. And what happens is, apparently, the students discovered they could teach a chapter, and across the United States in particular, I don't know if this is true in the other countries, students who were using that same textbook, had the same kind of class, would go to this YouTube to watch their peer teach it. And the student who was doing the teaching got paid for it, because YouTube has a payment system for this kind of thing. So they were actually making money teaching their peers, and their peers did not have to read the textbooks. Podcasts, we know, is another popular way students are learning on their own. So the digital remote learning has really already become the go-to for many students. And the remote digital learning is really opening a world of resources for Mercy students and faculty to learn from other Mercy schools and teachers. So I don't know if you've pondered or talked about these kind of questions, but let me throw a few questions out there. So how can Mercy leaders collaborate together and tap into this kind of learning across the Mercy education system? Can a theology teacher in one school teach theology remotely to another? Can a Bible class extend across schools? So what kinds of collaboration can happen across Mercy schools that would both increase the expertise and reduce the cost? How can, in another way, how can Mercy students use remote learning to hear firsthand stories of how sisters are addressing the critical concerns? There's lots of opportunities and creative thinking that can engage now with this remote learning. So what are the benefits of remote digital learning? At least for those who have access to it. I want to be clear, not everybody has access. I know that. And it's different in different countries. Importantly, in places where there is access, the inequities in education have become less a barrier for students who typically don't have access to resources. Think about students who can't afford in-person tutoring, or students who can't access in-person programs that assist them in learning differently. Programs like Khan Academy, which I'm sure you've heard of, and its AI tool, Khanmigo, are fast becoming the new standard for tutoring students and helping them excel at rates faster than in-person traditional tutoring. At a recent conference of Mercy Colleges and Education, Mercy Colleges and Universities, the presidents were discussing with the members of the Institute leadership team and among themselves. They were discussing how they might collaborate together to develop AI tutoring and education to help their students with remediation and to help them excel in learning. Again, the question is, what can Mercy schools do together may be more possible than what each one can do on its own. And that's the philosophy they were taking. AI is going to shape the future of education. We know that. And the question is Mercy ready for the next leap in education? And I do believe, if you've been following AI, we're talking 5 to 10 years down the road. It's coming very quickly. As education continues to become a more engaged process, teachers are shifting their roles from instructing in front of a classroom, for example, to facilitating learning. Classrooms themselves are changing. Students are teaching to learn while sharing what they're learning. They are producing podcasts, they're using green screen technologies, they're working with social media to teach what they're learning. Mercy schools are using creative approaches to promote these kinds of engaged learning. For Mercy, engaged learning offers opportunities for students to build relationships, to strengthen their Mercy community, to learn how to cooperate together in the learning process. These are all values that are in Mercy education. It's what makes Mercy different, that building of community, cooperating together. And this is one of the things I believe Mercy education does well, very well. Mercy students do not just focus on learning content or skills. They learn how to engage in community, build networks, and advocate for the common good. In the late 1970s, we saw the rise in immersive types of learning programs. And this is one area that, again, Mercy schools have led in. They've led it in two particular ways, through experiential learning and through service learning programs. So experiential learning, it usually engages students in more short-term immersion experiences. So in the 1990s, when I taught social justice at the Mount in Little Rock, I sought to help students understand, for example, the root causes that led to the imprisonment of women. And after having some discussions in class with the students, I decided to take the students to prison. This is Mount St. Mary's in Little Rock. So I took the students to prison to listen to the women that I had been working with, to hear their stories. I can tell you that when the students came back to class, they wanted to understand more about the incarceration of women. So it created an energy for them. And that's what experiential learning can do, is energize students to learn more deeply about issues and those affected by those issues. I also took the students to the water treatment plant, and we learned the processes that our drinking water went through. And that was an eye-opener for a lot of students. They learned how to find out what chemicals are in their drinking water. And by the way, you can do this too. Don't do it now, please, but you can go to ewg.org, which stands for the Environmental Working Group. Scroll down and you can click on Tap Water Database, and you can find out what's in your drinking water. However, just want to warn you, may not like the answer. These are just some of the experiential experiences that I wanted the students to have. Another one that I know some of you have engaged in, some of the schools that y'all are in, that there are other experiential learning experiences that are valued in Mercy education, such as the border witness programs. Schools that take the students to the Texas-Mexico border to the Mercy Arise program, where they learn the root causes of migration and the ripple effects of being undocumented. I also know of a program in the Philippines where students are learning how to regrow and nurture a forest, and they study the environmental effects of mining. Again, Mercy schools engage in the study of why migration happens, who is impacted, what are the effects of extractive industries on local communities and their biodiverse habitats. How does mining, for example, lead to immigration, reinforce institutional racism, destroy the health of women and their families, poison the earth? So taking one subject like mining really impacts all of our critical concerns. Another way that schools have led in immersive learning is through the service learning program. And what is important here for us as Mercy is that students engage in meaningful service. They should not just be meeting a service requirement. Now, Mercy doesn't do this, but I have to share an experience with you. I once saw a class of students from another school who were supposed to be doing service, who had been given toothbrushes to scrub clean the mortar between bricks on a brick wall. Thank God it was not a Mercy school. I was quite horrified by this. This is not what I would call service learning. So through service learning programs, students learn to understand and respond to the basic needs in their community, what we call charity. But they should also be learning systemic advocacy. In Mercy, we want students to learn and be able to converse about the root causes of societal issues, particularly issues related to the critical concerns. It's important that students engage in meaningful service that's rooted in the Gospels, that they learn the gospel values and put them in action. It's what I call embodying and animating the gospel values. So Mercy promotes gospel values of compassion and love and generosity, care of the immediate needs, and the prophetic voice that urges systemic change. So through service learning experiences, for example, the works of Mercy It's found in Matthew 25. But the works of mercy they're not just teachings on how to be charitable. They are life-altering conversion experiences that promote real change in ourselves and in the lives of others and our communities. Now, I just want to point out something here. You'll notice on this list that where it says welcome the stranger, if you were to Google the works of mercy today, you would find an awful lot of these lists would have not welcome the stranger, they changed it to shelter the homeless. This mistranslation of the Bible alters the mandate that Jesus gives to welcome the strangers living in the land and makes it more about sheltering one's own people living in the street. It shifts the mandate. Yes, it's a work of mercy to care for those living in the street, absolutely. But it's also a work of mercy to welcome people who come into our countries. And by changing the wording, it kind of waters down the impact of what Jesus was saying. I found that interesting when I looked that up. I was like, Teaching students how to interpret the Bible has become increasingly more and more important in a world that uses the Bible to justify intolerance, hatred, and violence. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah is often misinterpreted by what I would call literalist or conservative Christian leaders who seek to condemn homosexuality. But a careful contextual reading of this story reveals a folktale. It's not a historical event. It's a folktale about what happens when strangers are not welcomed in the land. So it's God using a story to teach a lesson. What happens when strangers are not welcomed in the land? That is the point of the story. The host, a man named Lot, does everything right. He even excels at following God's teachings about welcoming strangers. Lot begs them over and over to come to his house. Come to his house. He doesn't want them in the streets, and he wants to prepare a feast for them. He does everything he can to protect the strangers under his roof. So a contextual reading of this passage, it's about welcoming the stranger. And there's a lot more to this story, but none of it is about condemning homosexuality. So this is just one example, and I teach this at Loyola. I've taught this at Loyola, and students are often surprised to learn this. But it's so important that we understand how to interpret the Bible in today's world. So let's take a few minutes again. See if you have questions, comments. How are you doing? Is it too fast? Okay, thank you. Well, how about the rest of you? A lot of what you know, some of what you may be surprised by. I wish I could teach you biblical. That's really my area. All right, we got oh gosh, we got a blizzard in Nebraska. Oh gosh, it's from Mary Gibb. Yeah, weather has been really horrendous all the way across the United States. I know from my hometown in West Texas, where I come from, my family's having terrible sandstorms. They had a multi-vehicle pileup. It was pretty brutal. So, all right. Well, want me to continue? Let's see. How are we doing? All right, let me go on to the next section. All right. also would love to do, you want to do more of this in person than online, but it's the reality of our day, I think. Okay, so here I just want to talk briefly about the shifts in curriculum in Catholic colleges and universities that are impacting the faith development of students and how, sorry, my door ring is going off because the squirrels are having a good time in my backyard. So let me just say that the curriculum that changes that are happening at the college and university level, especially Catholic colleges, it's impacting the faith development of students. And I want to challenge how maybe Mercy can think differently about how to respond to the gaps that are occurring and talk about why that would be important. All right. So an important shift in higher education, especially in the US, is the move away from humanities to STEM field. So more courses in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, as well as a growing shift for criminology, interestingly enough, business, and professional schools like nursing. So those are the areas that are growing while humanities courses are in decline. And humanities courses include religious studies, theologies, philosophy. Those courses are in decline as students shift, their interests shift more to majors that are practical in today's market. And because the universities and colleges are also struggling with financial, they're really looking at courses that can help with those financial situations. So courses that are so important in today's political climate and in this quickly evolving AI age, these courses that we need are being reduced or eliminated. So there's 3 courses I want to give attention to. First, understanding rhetoric. Understanding the art of persuasive speech and when it's being used. Being able to recognize the elements of persuasive speech is a critically important skill. The second, biblical studies, knowing how to interpret biblical text. And the third is ethics, knowing how to make the tough decisions, not for students to make decisions so much as how, to understand the processes of how they make decisions, understanding the short and long-term effects of decisions. These courses are losing footholds as students are required to take less and less humanity courses. And there's often only introductory courses offered in biblical studies. Ethics tends not to attract students and is often not required at all. And rhetoric, if it's offered, is offered primarily to students in communication and philosophy. So you can see the growing gaps here. So why would it be important for Mercy to strategize about addressing these gaps? Well, for 2 main reasons. These kind of courses are needed to develop skills for engaging in systemic advocacy, but also these skills are needed for students to deepen the development of their faith. The humanities courses that are offered, when they're offered, are introductory. So students often don't have the opportunity to go to higher level courses that engage them to go deeper with their faith. So they risk remaining at the lower levels of the stages of faith development. When I taught at Loyola, I found that many students would come into biblical studies with a very literal understanding of the Bible. They believed that there were historical biblical persons named Adam and Eve, and that Jonah was really a prophet swallowed by a big fish. Many students come into the class with the idea that God is really a male. A few even believe God was a bearded man who lived in the sky. At the college level, they're coming in with these thoughts. At the elementary levels, we know students begin to understand meaning behind such figures like Santa Claus, and they learn that Santa isn't real, but carries the meaning of Christmas. However, when it comes to stories of the Bibles, students generally do not get that kind of advancement in working with biblical stories. Students struggle to get the meaning because they have literalized stories such as those found in the book of Genesis that are not meant to be read as historical fact. Catholic biblical scholars for decades have taught the Bible contains stories that are not historic. So the story of Jonah, for example, is a parody on how not to be a prophet, and it's most likely a comic folktale. The question is this: how do we help students process through these early stages of faith development? Because it's going to impact their worldview and their faith, obviously. How we teach the students to interpret the Bible matters. How we understand the God of the Bible shapes our worldview. So by the time students get to college, we hope they have at least understood that metaphor holds symbolic meaning. Students need to know the fundamentals of reading the Bible and understand there are different genres in the Bible for teaching how to be a person of justice and deep faith. So, but by being able to distinguish the difference between history and myth and folktales in the Bibles, students can go deeper in exploring the meaning. And students can never be too young to understand the power of story in their faith journey. So I showed you the earlier stages, the literalism, seeing God as literally a male. The literalism is that early stage. Once they process metaphor as meaning, they can begin to go into the levels of wisdom, contemplation, and being. They begin to move through the different stages of faith development. So where and how can Mercy address these gaps? Well, imagine if students never took higher college level biblical studies, never knew the expansiveness of God because they had only one metaphor for God, even though the Bible has 72 metaphors for God. Much of the issues arising in our world today are compounded by literalist interpretations of the Bible. And examples of this include the growth of Christian nationalism and the prosperity gospel. The prosperity gospel is that ideology that God blesses people with wealth if they have faith. The other problems that have come out of the literalist interpretation or misinterpretation of the Bible is intolerances against gender identities, the inhospitable and abusive treatment of migrants, and a host of other intolerances that are gripping our world today. So I'm going to stop again and just give you a little bit. We're in the home stretch, but I want to just be sure there's not a question or a comment you would like to make at this point. I just have one more section and a conclusion.
I I I deeply appreciate the point about how important is to spend time to teach Bible, to help the students how to read the Bible in a critical way. Uh, I heard the expression before to have the hermeneutics of suspicion about if how yeah, if this was really true or not. So hopefully in our curriculums we can have spend more time I am working at Cristo Rey High School, a Mercy sponsored school in Sacramento, California, and so far I heard there is only one semester to give the introduction to the Bible. But if we don't keep the Bible as background in every topic, I think that we are not reaching the point about how to really understand the Bible and how to read it and apply it to our lives. So I appreciate your point about it.
Thank you, Luz. A lot of times what we do with Bible is we tend to open the Bible up and read the English translation and say, what does this mean to you? Kind of thing. Without cultural context, a lot of the excitement and richness of the Bible and how it relates and how it stimulates the curiosity of the students is lost. It becomes more thematic approaches that they can't get into, or that's what we have found. They just trying to get them stirred and excited about the Bible. And there's so many different ways to understand the Bible through different lenses.
What strategies can we implement to make sure that the religious part is really being taught to the students? Or I feel that maybe these two should be a meeting for the theology teachers in all our classrooms. Like, we as leaders, yes, we make sure that the religion part is brought to our school because it's the root, of course. But this could be a good training too for all the theology teachers. I think that they should be here too, listening to this, and kind of like you can help them to navigate the new things that are happening right now with our students, that they are probably the interest in religion is not as big as it was before. You know what I mean? So what strategies can we do as a leaders to implement that, or to help them to implement in our school?
So you raise a very good question. Lena, is it Lena? Yeah.
Lena.
Lena. So you raise a very good question. It's like, it's really at the heart of not just deepening the students' faith, but getting them excited again about what it means to be deeply faithful people. And some of the old ways we've done things, they've long lost interest. The other thing that they have social media. So when I first started teaching at Loyal, the first half, I'd say the first 6 years, students were just coming to class, not just having their eyes wide open and loving it. I started having a little too many students, and they got very interested in it. They were fascinated. By the time I got to the latter 6 years at Loyola, a shift started happening. And I only recently found out what was driving that shift. It was 2012. It was the generation coming in to the college and universities that had grown up with the phone. Their whole social life had been reconstructed by the phone. So I was getting these students into my class. They were already on social media. They were all like, oh yeah, we found out that they don't wait anymore. They come into class having watched us. That the problem was I had to help them understand what sources on media are good and which are not. That was the thing I had to teach them. Just because a guy's standing there in a suit in front of a library of books and a mahogany desk doesn't mean he's really a scholar. He's projecting himself very nicely, but he's not. So I had to help them learn some of those things. But students will get excited when they start to see the context of these stories because they can relate to it. The contextual understanding of the Bible relates to your own context, but you got to first understand where it's coming from. So, any other? So some of the questions and stirrings that you have, just I'm sure y'all are going to explore more about this. And I can tell you, just personal experience, I can tell you that when I was in high school, I was so sick of the sacraments. Now, I know that probably shocks y'all because I'm a sister, right? I was so sick of the sacraments because we had it every single year and it was so blandly taught that I thought, oh God, here we go again. And when I was in high school, I wanted to learn the Bible. But of course, the Catholic schools didn't, at that time, did not stress the Bible at all. So, yeah, as Emerald, one of our famous chefs in New Orleans, used to say, you got to kick it up a notch. You always put spice in the food. All right. So let me go back. We're in the last section. Let me go ahead and move on there. I hope this is being helpful to y'all. All right, where am I? All right. So, oh, I think I went too far. Let me back up a little bit. All right. So it is important for us to remember that mercy identity is situated within our Catholic identity. That we really we cannot be mercy without being Catholic. Our Catholic identity conveys that we function in the name of the church and that we're integral to the mission of the church. So when we speak of strengthening our Mercy Catholic identity, we are speaking of 4 key areas. Mercy being committed to the Catholic teachings, mercy being rooted in the gospel, mercy seeking to embody and animate the gospel values, and mercy tending to the critical concerns. Those are how we strengthen our Mercy Catholic identity. Each gospel relates a particular set of values that the gospel author wanted to stress to his community. So when you're reading the gospels, you're getting the lens of that gospel author. And I'll just give you some brief little tidbits here. The Gospel of Luke contains story after story, almost 40% more stories in the Gospel of Luke. And by the way, I strongly suspect that whoever wrote the Gospel of Luke was familiar with Greco-Roman theater. Wish I could have more time to explain that. But he tells story after story, challenging the wealthy households of his community to care for the vulnerable poor who come to live and serve among them. The classic Lukean stories are that of the rich man and Lazarus. And just to point out the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, the rich man is unnamed and Lazarus has a name. That's a reversal of expectation. Not only is the rich man nameless, but when he goes to the netherworld, he begs for a drop of water. And he is told, if you had given Lazarus even a crumb of bread. So there's some beautiful nuances and ironies going on in the story. But typical of Luke, he shows you a reversal. And just a funny aside story here. In the parable, it says that Lazarus goes up and lies on the bosom of Abraham. And one of my students said at Loyola, it was like, Sister, what is Lazarus doing on the bosom of Abraham? So I had to explain, yeah, I could see where you're getting that, why you're having that question. In the Greco-Roman period, people laid down for meals, and they laid down next to each other so that your head was positioned almost in front of the chest of the person behind you. And you laid in sort of a U shape. And so when it says Lazarus is at the bosom of Abraham, people reading that and hearing that in antiquity would have automatically said, oh, he's at a banquet. He's having a feast and eating at a banquet. But you have to fill that in because it's not all detailed. The rich man, the rich fool is the other classic story in the Gospel of Luke. And this is the rich fool who built the barns, and then he built bigger barns, and he did not share his goods or his feast. He feasted by himself. And then he ends up dying and losing everything. Many of Luke's stories are going to depict these reversal of fortunes. And what Luke is trying to say to his community is these kind of reversals can and do happen. So what is it? What do you want others to do for you? What would you want others to do for you if you were in that situation? So he raises that value quite a bit. And he also stresses forgiveness. He stresses repentance, charity, care for the poor, the oppressed, the marginalized. And there's some other great stories I wish I could tell you because Luke is like my favorite gospel. I could tell you a few others that actually have humor in them. There's some comic stuff going on in some of Luke's stories. Okay, so when we say that mercy seeks to embody and animate the gospel values, it's important for us to understand how and why the gospel authors embrace common values, but also stress different ones. So the Gospels have common values, but they also have very distinct ones. And each of the Gospels are going to reveal a particular set of these values. There is this book that I use with my class called The Synopsis of the Four Gospels. And it lays the Gospels out in parallel next to each other so that they can read the stories and see how the Gospel authors are shifting the values. You can see it much easier there. It's one of the books that students were fascinated by. Okay. Let me see. Let me just say a little bit about the Gospel of Mark. So we know that the Gospel of Mark, the community that he was writing to suffered some kind of persecution and imprisonment. So Mark is going to be different. He's going to encourage his hearers to stand strong in their faith, to support one another, to offer hope to those who suffer, and healing to the vulnerable. And one of the values that comes out of the Gospel of Luke that I love is this: be disciples of courage. That theme runs through the Gospel of Mark. Be disciples of courage. So those are just some of the values of the Gospel of Mark. And I'm going to skip Matthew. Matthew also has some values. The works of mercy are one of them. But a lot of Matthew's values parallel Luke's with some distinctions because Matthew teaches to a Jewish community. We believe he's writing to a Jewish community and links them back to their Jewish roots. The Gospel of John, this author is supporting his community because they have been ostracized by their original community. So the Gospel of John is speaking of solidarity, standing together, supporting each other. They've been kicked out. And it sounds like not only have they been kicked out of their former community, but that they've also been persecuted. So they're vulnerable. They're in great need of love and support. That's why you hear Jesus in the Gospel of John talking so much about love and supporting each other and being with each other. It's because they're suffering. So he relates that how much God loves the community of disciples. So just some distinctions in the different gospels. So mercy embodies and animates the gospel values of love and compassion. You've heard me say this before. Welcoming, forgiveness, repentance, and care of the poor, marginalized, and oppressed. Mercy educates students to seek the common good, to work for systemic change, to be disciples of courage, living the gospel values, to be the prophetic voice against injustice, but all in the nonviolent spirit of mercy. And so I believe this is the last piece here, and then I have a conclusion, but let me just speak. You all know of the critical concerns. This is not new to you. The critical concerns are important for Mercy's focus on working to the well-being of the common good and our earthly home. Racism, of course, an evil that affects all of us and needs to be dismantled. We're all called to understand and address the root causes of immigration and to recognize our own complicity in their suffering. And through our Mercy schools and healthcare and social services, we strive for the well-being of women. We seek the well-being of Earth through a conversion of our lifestyle that's making choices not to support destructive industries or industries that poison the land and water, and to engage in advocacy. And finally, Mercy seeks nonviolence as a path to work for peace and justice and systemic change. We are always called to ask, how are we nonviolent in our relationships with each other, in our relationships with migrants, women, Earth? So this tending to the critical concerns and engaging in advocacy, speaking with a prophetic voice, are all deeply woven in Mercy. So before I do the conclusion, let me just see if there's any other thoughts you have. Before I get the little conclusion in, any other thoughts or comments? Or I hope you're finding this helpful. And someday I'll just put a teaser in. I like to do this with my students because I know that, soap operas have that hook when you watch a soap opera, and at the end of it, you're like, oh no, I got to see what happens tomorrow. So here's my little hook. The rich man that dressed in purple. There's a whole story behind how he dressed. There's a comic thing in how he dressed. Guess you'll have to wait till next time to find out about that one. Any questions or comments? All right, ready to wrap up? Okay. All right. So when we speak of strengthening our Mercy identity, we're also called to integrate what we call cathedral thinking. I don't know if you've heard of cathedral thinking before, but in his book, The Good Ancestor, Roman Kisnarek, a little hard to say, encourages us to cultivate long-term perspectives. It's not just about focusing on the immediate goals, but also the long-term impact. He explains that in the medieval period, it took centuries to build a magnificent cathedral. And the workers who began building that cathedral, they never got to see it finished. But they believed in what they were doing, and they knew it would impact the future. So we know that Mercy is not just to educate a student for today or tomorrow. We educate for the future, for the well-being of our communities, for the well-being of Earth, for the well-being of the common good. We teach our students to follow their dreams and passions, but we also teach our students to be mindful of the larger vision. We want them to come away asking, how can I use my gifts and my passions to serve my community and build a more just world now and for generations to come? How can I make this home of ours, Earth, a more healthy and vibrant and loving community for the generations yet to be born? And that is it. Stop sharing. And see if there's any final observations, comments, questions. All right.
Well, Sister Terri, I just want to say thank you. I think that, you know, when I was thinking about our schools and what you said is what resonated was that be disciples of courage. And I think, you know, for us as schools to teach the students to be that prophetic voice, the work we do in having them understand and identify root causes, you know, that systemic change in advocacy and even the skills that we teach around advocacy, you know, having an understanding of that shift in education at the collegiate level, but what we can do to teach advocacy. And I think the other, you know, and I associate it with courage because our kids in this world of, you know, on their phones and everything that consumes their day, I think that the courage piece for us as leaders is to and you referred to it a little bit, you know, how do we get them excited about their faith development? How do we really, how do we introduce the Bible to them so that, you know, they are stories that are meaningful and they interpret them in a way that helps them with their own faith development and growth. So thank you so much. I think you gave us so much to think about. And I know as we go back to, you know, our schools and just, I think we need time to digest and think about, you know, what are our next steps? How do we help our students to be that voice? But we appreciate so much your time today. We're so happy that you are here and sharing your words with us and your experiences. So thank you again. And I thank everyone for being here today and wish everyone a happy St. Joseph's Day and enjoy your afternoon or enjoy your, I can't even say afternoon because I'm looking around and I'm thinking, where are people? You might still be in your morning.
All right. Thank y'all. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Terri. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.